All right, now, today I'm going to be talking about, and this is Brett talking again here in North Carolina, where I live. And I'm driving from Eden out to Reedsville, which is about a 10-12 minute drive, because a buddy of mine who was helping me yesterday with my truck while we were driving around, his keys slipped out of his pocket into my seat, and I didn't spot that until I got home, and I wasn't going to turn around and drive all the way back out there, and then he was working on his truck, and he was going to come and get his keys as soon as he got his truck fixed. Well, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon the next day, so I'm guessing he didn't get his truck fixed. So anyways, I'm driving out there to give him his keys back. And when I was there, he showed me some old guitar effects pedals that he had. And I'm a real sucker for guitar effects pedals that I don't have. And so anyways, I asked him if I could take them home and try them out with my gear before I made any decisions, and he said sure. So I took home an old, real boxy Fender chorus pedal with about 5 knobs on it, and I also took home a no-name. Almost all of them are made in China these days, but it's kind of a triangular shaped pedal, similar to a distortion pedal I have, maybe the same brand, and it's a delay. It's an analog delay with just a few knobs on it and real uncomplicated. And this other delayed pedal that I've got is nice. It's got a very small footprint and it's got more choices in it and stuff. But for some reason, the way that it is shielded, well, actually the way that it is not shielded, impacts on the behavior of other pedals that I might use in the same chain. It's problematic. All by itself, it's great, but if I try to use it with a looper or something else, it seems as though there's some kind of invisible combat going on between that other delay pedal and the rest of them. So anyways, it's been off my chain for about a month now, and lo and behold, this old simple analog delay pedal becomes available for me to try out. And anyways, I tried both of them and they both worked pretty good. Not terrifically impressed with the chorus, but really happy with the function of that delay pedal, and so I decided I was going to ask him what he wanted for it. And before I did, he texted me and said that those pedals, he's looking for about $15 a piece for them, so I'm taking him $15 and the chorus pedal that I don't want in addition to his keys right now. And there you go. So why did I say all of that? I said all of that to get to this. I like to drive a truck with a stick, and I've had a lot of vehicles that had automatic transmissions with them. Nothing against an automatic transmission. Certainly requires a lot less range of movement and coordination, and a whole bunch easier to deal with steep hills with, I suppose, in traffic. But I like a stick, and I'm calling this talk "The First Clutch is Practice." And I'm calling it "The First Clutch is Practice." I want to shout out to my wife's cousin Lynn. I think of her as my cousin Lynn too. She's a good gal. She was up from Louisiana last week to drive her Uncle Sam up here. He's gonna try living in North Carolina for a spell and see how that goes. been in Louisiana all his life. I don't think he's only been out of that state once. And so he's in the spare room over at my wife's mom's house for a while, and we'll see how that goes. And he plays guitar, and he has a pedal steel with him right now, and amplification and stuff. And I'm not trying to script anybody's life, but I've certainly put my willingness to jam with him anytime he wants out there, and reminded him that I'm also retired, and we can there won't be a lot of conflicting stuff going on, because I don't have a life that's complicated. I keep it pretty wide open, so that things that need to be done, things that need to be realized that they need to be done, I can be conscious of them and not all cluttered up with stupid things that, you know, you waste your day thinking about stuff that either isn't never going to happen, isn't supposed to happen, or that you don't want to do because you got a bad feeling about it. So the first clutches practice, said my wife's cousin Lynn when we were talking about our kids and how many of them know how to drive standard. We were sitting out on the porch where we talk and smoke and study, and Lynn said her daddy always said that back in the day, and she had a couple of brothers, and I thought that was some great wisdom right there that her father said, because it's applicable to all kinds of things, right? When you think about it, I never fried it. I don't think I ever fried a clutch, even though I was kind of a latecomer to learn how to use a clutch, because I started driving in about 1975, I suppose, was when I turned 16. And, you know, you could get a permit, and I went through the high school's driver's education course. I think they gave it over the Easter break one year. And 3 or 4 of us would pile into a big sedan with 2 steering wheels and zip around the county and do things for the first time in a car, you know. And yeah, so I started driving just as soon as I could. I remember coming back from getting my license out wherever in the county it was that we had to go get it. My dad took me out there. He let me drive there. No, he didn't. Oh, I remember what it was. It's when we went to get my driving permit. My dad drove me out there, and then he let me drive home. I'd never driven before. And I remember staring at that center line. You know, it was like 4-lane blacktop at home, and I'm looking at the line between the 2 lanes, as though it's going to keep me in the lane I'm in if I keep looking at it properly and stuff. But anyways, we made it home, and I'm not a person that's had a lot of automobile accidents. I've been hit more than I ever hit anything. And you know, the important stuff in life isn't easy to learn. Well, actually, it's not easy to get to a level of proficiency where you can feel as though you've learned it. Some things are real easy to talk about as though they're easy to do, but you know, mastery cannot happen just by sitting around thinking about something. You can't think a building into existence. You know, you can't think yourself into heaven. You can't get into a car having watched a few videos about driving a stick shift and clutching and so forth and get it right. You're not going to immediately be able to drive around the streets of San Francisco, as it were, with a standard transmission. You're likely going to fry a clutch at some point, and you'll sure know when you did. And yeah, the first clutches practice. My first guitar was a Sears Silvertone guitar. I don't even remember receiving it. It just was in my closet, and it was a mess. It probably cost $30 or so when it was hanging at the department store and was picked up by whoever bought it. Perhaps it was gifted to us by a cousin or something. I don't know. But when my friend Dave Chase, shout out to Dave Chase down in Texas, when Dave Chase was playing his nice big Dreadnought Guild guitar and honestly playing perfect pitch recreations of James Taylor and Jim Croce and Harry Chapin, Cat Stevens, you know, people like that back in the first half of the 1970s. I wanted to know how to do that. I asked him if he could show me how to do that, and he looked at my hands and he said, "Yeah, you got good long fingers. You should be able to play some guitar." And I mentioned that I think there was one in the closet at home, and he says, "Well, the next time you come over, bring it." Which I did, and the very first thing he taught me was how to tune it. Which brings us back to the first clutches practice. Because how many of us have ever picked up a guitar not knowing that strings age and get corroded and stuff, and try to tune it and bust a string? And the strings on that Silvertone guitar were most certainly scrap metal by then. And so that's when I learned that you could go to the record store down in the village, and they sold guitar strings behind the counter, which is cool. Old days stuff. There aren't record stores anymore. There are hardly bookstores anymore. Even less music stores. The music store in the hometown of Charlie Poole, credited as the father of, or the grandfather, a progenitor, as it were, of country music in America, which the local Charlie Poole Society says his first 78 sold more copies than there were record players in America. And yet in the town of this historical fact, if you go to where a music store sat for about 40 some years, Glasgow's Music, you go there today, and there's just this, it's like a missing tooth on the boulevard. You know, there's all these neglected buildings, and then there's kind of a gap in between two of them. And that's where the music store used to be. That's where I used to be. I could actually walk there in 5 minutes from the first house we rented when we moved here years ago. And it's all gone. And you know, there were other music stores in this county when I moved here. There was Stedler's out here in Reedsville. I'm very close to where that used to be right now. I'm in Reedsville. I can see the big old Lucky Strike brick chimney sticking up from here where they used to make cigarettes. Maybe they still do, I don't know. I don't think about industry very much. Stedler, the son of the man that owned that music store, and that man made some of the best pedal steel guitars, they say. I don't play pedal steel, but they say that the pedal steels that came out of Mr. Stedler's shop in Reedsville, North Carolina were so good. And rare as hen's teeth, you know, because he made them by himself. Kind of a side hobby, something he enjoyed doing, so he would do it as slow as it took to do it. Anyways, that man's son, Lenny, he came to the Methodist church we went to for a lot of years, and he was a Methodist preacher. He talked to us about how when he was a kid, he played bass in a band called Blackfoot back during the heyday of Southern rock, the second wave of Southern rock, right? Post Allman Brothers Southern rock. I think of that as, you know, Skynyrd and the Allman Brothers, perhaps Marshall Tucker. Those are kind of first wave. Poco is another one. First wave country rock bands. The International Submarine Band, Graham Parsons was another one. The second wave would be groups like Blackfoot from Reedsville, and Molly Hatchet, 38 Special, Greengrass and High Tides. What was the name? Henry Paul, that guitarist, when he split off from the Outlaws. The Outlaws were a second wave band too. I got to see some of those bands back in the day. Best one I ever saw was Marshall Tucker. I never got to see the Allman Brothers. It's kind of sad. I would have loved to, but here and gone. When I saw the Marshall Tucker Band about a year after they got popular, way up on the campus of Clarkson College. It's an engineering school on the top of New York State in Potsdam. Marshall Tucker Band made me want to learn how to play slide guitar. And I tried to play slide guitar a number of times. Let's get back to the first clutches practice. And for a number of years, because certain players were in agreement that a glass slide gives you a better tone, I kept going through glass slide and breaking them, because they're cylindrical and made of glass. So they have a penchant for rolling off of wherever you put them. Or just tipping over sideways if you stand it on end, and then it busts too. But I did the glass slide thing for years, and while doing so, I accumulated some technique. But I kept losing my slide to breakage. That was my first clutch, as it were, as a slide guitarist. And then I even used the Coracidin bottle. I got one of those. It was expensive and it broke. And then I started trying steel and brass slides and decided that I liked the brass slide better because, and it has to do, I'm sure, with the softness of the metal, it has a softer tone than steel, and it's also lighter weight. Two good things right there. So I narrowed it on down to brass slide. It's my second clutch. Whoa! I'm pulling into a convenience store. My God, it looked like a dog was driving that car. All right, continuing with the first clutches practice. This might have to be a part 2 because I'm talking more than I thought I was gonna. Which happens, one thought triggers another. Stuff you didn't ever plan to talk about all of a sudden just sort of gets sucked in. It passes the event horizon of the concept and it can't get away. But anyways, I just dropped off a painting that I'd made at Lucky City Brewing in Reedsville, and that makes them about the 10th business in the county. Yep, about the 10th business in the county that I've made a painting. I call them business portraits. There's another example of this. The first clutches practice, right? When you're learning how to do something, it costs you something. Sometimes it costs you to learn nothing. Like a college degree, most of the time anymore. I think I was one of the last generations of young people that went through college and came out and got a job that was similar to what you went to school for, Hell, back then, some of the very first computer programmers were coming out of colleges, and my college actually had the biggest computer science department in the whole SUNY system, and they were still using boxes of punch cards back then, and hand punching their programs into the cards and then running all the cards through a computer that was big enough to fill half a basketball court. And I got an English degree and an art degree, double major, and I came out and eventually ended up teaching English and art, and it cost me. I had to go in the Navy for 8 years to pay down the college debt that I had already accumulated because I had to work my way through college. I want to credit my parents for paying for the first year of college tuition. They paid for me to go find out if that's something I wanted to invest in, but then it was on me after that, and that's just kind of the nature of my upbringing. Was the work ethic will always be present, or you will fail or lose out. And that's true. The boy's muffler is a form of entertainment to him, I suppose. First clutches practice, yeah, so these business portraits, another example of the same thing. Where it costs you something to learn how to do something. You burn out that clutch because at first you're ignorant, but then you're stupid. Once you know how and you're not doing it right, you're stupid. And when you're ignorant, you really can't be faulted for that. You might be faulted for having a lack of curiosity about getting out of your ignorance, but I don't suppose that's a sin. It's not as though life doesn't clutter us up with a bunch of stuff we need to do right now. But the first business portrait that I did was of the interior of Dick's Drive-In. And I don't even know what it was that possessed me that day to be carrying a pad of paper that wasn't lined when I went there for breakfast. But I did, and I just happened to, I don't know, I guess I might have ordered a big breakfast and it took a while for him to get it to me, and I just started drawing what the restaurant looked like from the table I was sitting at. And of course I didn't finish it, but I got the geometries of it, down. The lines, where stuff was. I believe this is even before I had a telephone that could take a picture. And I might have gone back there to take a picture with a camera, an actual camera, to refer to as a finished picture, and I had the intention of giving it to them from the moment I started drawing it. They make a good breakfast, they got a decent meatloaf, they aren't terribly expensive, they truly make the best cheeseburger in town, which I think I might go get one of right now. Plus, more than a few kids that I taught worked there over the years, first job. So it's often a pleasure to go in there because I'll hear someone say, "Hey, Mr. Hart," and then we have a cool conversation and a catch-up, and I learn where they've gone after I taught them as middle school kids, and nowadays as elementary school kids even. Fun. In fact, it's one of the greatest blessings that I ever have is when I run into an ex-student, or maybe the parent of an ex-student, and for no particular reason, they recollect something to me that I hadn't thought about in 20 years. The memory comes back, and then I feel the good feeling of the memory that they're telling me about, and I kind of thank God that I had the opportunity to be a public school teacher for the rare occasions that I was doing something worthwhile. I mean, it's a job for sure, and I certainly worked with a lot of teachers for whom it was nothing but more money. It certainly wasn't a career or a calling for them, and their students knew that. The younger a kid is, the better they are at calling BS. I mean that. I think that before the hormones kick in, you are at the height of your discernment. The first thing that you discern is what's going on in your own family and how it contrasts with how they project themselves into the world as a brand. And then you learn the same lesson in church and school and so forth. There's the billboard, and then there's what's under the glue, So anyways, I finished up that picture, multimedia, used a bunch of different kinds of pigments and stuff from the hardware store and whatever, and got this picture done. It was probably about 9 by 11. And I went down there to eat again. This is probably a week later. And I talked to one of the brothers that runs the place, one of the Woods brothers. And I said, "Here." He's like, "What's that?" I said, "It's the inside of your restaurant. I made a picture for you because I like your food. I think you're all right." And he said, "Thank you." And he took it. And the next time I went in, it was on a wall in a frame with glass on the front of it. So I like that. I appreciate that, so the grease doesn't get on there and mess it up. And it's still hanging on that wall to this day. And there are a number of other businesses in the county that I gifted with a picture because they had given me some enjoyment, or maybe just a nice conversation that I needed with somebody that ran the place. House of Health, they're no longer in business, but they got one. The little pork shop was moved to the bigger space next door. They were one of my early ones. In fact, they were the second one. A place called The Hive. It's cold cut platters and mead and wine and beer and stuff like that. Who exhibited some art and that we played some live music gigs at. I made one for them. I made one for every school I taught at, and went and gave it to the administrator, and in most instances it's hanging in the school. Only one of all the various folks that I made one of them for kind of received it with indifference, and that's okay. I was raised by a man, he's 92 years old now, and he told me as recently as last year that he never liked art. Oh my Lord. He never liked art. He married a woman with a ceramics degree from a very prestigious art school who also liked to paint. And then their first kid becomes somebody that just simply can't seem to get through a day without making something musical or visual to catch whatever that day is provoking them about or inspiring them with. Yeah, my 92-year-old dad still don't like art, which is amusing to me because of all the various times that I invited he and my mother up when I had an art show or something. Some people don't like art, and some people don't listen to music. I don't understand them, you know. Maybe they fried their first clutch somehow, or someone fried it for them, and they said, that's it, no more driving with the standard. You know? Like the teacher that leans in over this picture that you're making when you're about 8 years old, basically tells you they don't know what the heck it is and it looks weird. You know, when you're trying to draw a picture of your grandmother and it just destroys you. You know, that's it. You put down the crayon and later you become an accountant or you sell hot dogs for a living. Yeah. I tried as a teacher to not burn out other people's clutches. I was pretty gentle with correction insofar as the subject matter that we were teaching. And I almost got my clutch burned out when I was student teaching up in Massachusetts. I'm not kidding you. Because I come out of college and I got, got this art and literature under my belt. According to the people that know stuff, I know stuff too. And that's supposed to be marketable. I go into Navy, and my recruiter burns one of my clutches. I ain't lying. He burns out one of my clutches. And that was the clutch that I was trying to shift from civilian into being a naval officer with my degree, because with a college degree they say that you could be a military officer. That's what distinguishes the NCO often from the E1 from the O1 is just a college degree. They might be equally smart and have similar skill sets, but one of them's got this piece of paper that says, you know the stuff that we want you to know. Well, I went to this recruiter, and I was ignorant. I wasn't stupid, I was ignorant. Even though my daddy had been in the Navy, I didn't know that there's different recruiters for enlisted and officers' ranks. Just didn't know. And I went to an enlisted recruiter to talk about becoming a naval officer. And he had a quota to fill. And so I remember this as though I were sitting at the desk this morning. I mean it. I said, I'd like to talk to you about becoming an officer in the Navy. He says, do you have a college degree? I said, yes, sir, I do. I have two of them. And he said, what is it? What's it in? And I said, one of them is in English, literature and writing and stuff. And the other one is in visual arts, which would include photography and so forth. I'd made films by then, for crying out loud. He said, well, that won't do. I said, why not? And he said, I swear I can see his face in my truck right now. He said, this is the nuclear Navy. And I said, yeah. And he goes, so what we're looking for are math degrees and science and stuff like that for the officers' ranks. And I believed him. He was lying through his teeth. And so I said, well, what else you got? And I enlisted in the United States Navy for 4 years to become a linguist, a translator. He said, that's what that English degree is good for. I didn't know there were intel officers. Oh, mercy. What people will do when they don't think they're going to get caught. Talk about burning out a clutch. So fast forward through boot camp and a year and a half of deep, intense 6 to 7 hours a day studying the Korean language and culture, writing, reading, listening, history, all that, food, with the intention of going over somewhere in the Pacific and making sure that we got boots on the ground when North Korea does weird stuff and we can listen to them, you know, and hopefully get a leg up. That was my gig. I thought that'd be pretty cool. And then after that, I figured they were going to shoot me right over to Korea. No. After that, we're going to send you down to Pensacola, Florida, to the Naval Air Station down there. Because, remember, you signed up to be air crew. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. So they sent me down there for a few months of extremely rigorous phys ed, mostly. Swimming in the ocean and jumping out of... learning how to get yanked out of the ocean by helicopters and simulating, you know, having to parachute into the ocean and rough seas and the parachute's all over you and you're all tangled up in the cordage. You know, simulations of helicopter crashes in lakes. And I'm down there and I'm about a week or two away from graduation from the Naval Air Crew Candidate School in Pensacola, Florida, at the Naval Air Station there. I had a really good time, actually, during that. I met a bunch of guys that were E6s and E7s and stuff who knew how to have a good time in Pensacola, and we, back in those days, did exactly that. But I was in the commissary, sitting in the caf in there, eating something. It's kind of crowded. And somebody I didn't know in civilian clothing walks up and says, is that seat taken? And I said, no, sir, go ahead. And he sat down, and, you know, he had a meal, and we were eating, and like you do, you know, you just kind of commenced to talking, and I presume in advance that this guy's probably got something to do with the Navy, seeing as he's at the Naval Air Station, and we're talking away. He's got to be 20 years older than me. Real clean-cut fellow. And he starts asking me about my rate, my rank, you know, what do you do, what rank have you achieved? I told him right now I'm an E3, but I think I'm going to be an E4 here in about a month. It looks pretty good that I'm going to get that E4. How long you been in? And I said, well, I've done boot camp and language school out in Monterey, California, you know, at the Defense Language Institute. I said, after this, they're going to send me back to California so that I can go through the POW school, you know, in case you go down in hostile territory. You might want to have thought about what that might be like before it happens, which was truly one of the 5 most awfulest experiences I've had in my life was that Navy SEER school conducted by SEALs who like to toss people around. But anyways, I told him about all this, and he's like, and somehow it slipped out, you know, after college, I blah, blah, blah. He goes, well, did you finish college? I said, yes, sir, I did. What'd you study? I told him. And then he comes out with, well, why didn't you go OCS with that degree? And he says, Lord knows. He says, I got guys working for me that I thank God in heaven that they can spell. And, you know, and you know, when you're reading important orders and reports and data and intelligence analyses and so forth, which is what you're going to be involved in, he says to me, accuracy matters. Having a vocabulary matters, you know, and stuff like that. He says, and plus, right here on this campus, we got the Naval Photography College School. You know, you could have gone to that. And then I told him about my experience at the Recruiter, you know, and how I had actually entered that door hoping to go into the OCS. That man's face got real stony. And he says to me, "Where did you enlist?" And I told him North Syracuse, New York. I think it was on Route 11. And he pulled out a little pad of paper and he wrote that down. And he asked me my name and my middle name and my social security number and so forth. And then he said to me, "Son, I'm the commander of naval recruitment for the whole Navy. This man I've been eating lunch with." This was an appointed moment, I think. "I'm the commander of naval recruitment, and I am really, really, really disappointed in what happened to you, and I'm going to look into it." And he knew which class I was in and how much longer I was going to be there. And then, as it turned out, he was the speaker at our graduation ceremony, and my parents were there. And he found me and came up and told that man that, I think he was an E6 or an E7 at the recruiting office, he'd busted him down to E1. And the guy was just a couple years away from retirement. He busted him down to E1 for what he did. He said he told me you can still strike for getting into OCS. And I said, "Sir, look, with all due respect, I've just spent 2 years of a whole mess of schooling and more phys ed than I ever want to do for the rest of my life unless I'm running away from something, in order to go do a job that I'm kind of excited about going and doing. I ain't done it yet. And so I'm going to go do that. And if I decide later on that I want to make a life of the Navy, I'll remember what you said to me, and I might just go in that direction." And we shook hands, and that was it. It was the last time I saw him. Well, there's a situation where somebody leaned in, very purposefully burned somebody else's clutch because they deserved it. And sometimes we got to lean in and stop a person when they're clutching wrong and tell them, "No, you're not driving my car ever again. I'm sorry. This is getting costly, son." So shout out to Cousin Lynn for her daddy's quote, "The first clutch is practice." That has been a very useful expression for me since I heard it, and it applies to things I've been thinking about for years. All right. God bless. Good luck.